Here's something strange that almost nobody tells you. You cannot become yourself by trying harder to be a better version of who you already are. That's the trap most people spend their whole lives inside. They think becoming yourself means self-improvement, a shinier career, a calmer temperament, a more disciplined routine. Carl Jung discovered the opposite. He found that the self you're aching to become isn't waiting somewhere ahead of you, at the end of some achievement. It's buried underneath you, beneath everything you were taught to be. And the work isn't building, it's excavation. Jung spent the better part of 50 years watching people try to construct their way into wholeness, and he watched almost all of them fail. Not because they were weak or lazy, but because they were pointed in the wrong direction. They were adding when they needed to be removing. They were performing when they needed to be listening. He gave the real process a name, individuation, and he described it as the single most important task a human being can undertake. He also warned that it was the most difficult, the most frightening, and the one that most people abandon somewhere in the middle, because the middle feels like losing your mind. Think of an acorn for a moment. An acorn contains, encoded inside it, the entire shape of the oak it's meant to become. It doesn't decide to become an oak. It doesn't attend seminars on treehood. It doesn't try to become a birch because birches are more admired this season. Given the right conditions and enough time, it becomes the only thing it was ever going to be, more and more fully itself. Jung believed human beings carry the same kind of blueprint, not a personality you invent, but a self you were born already containing. And the tragedy of most lives is that the acorn spends 70 years trying to be a rose because a rose is what got approval. Today, I want to walk you through what Jung actually meant by becoming yourself. I'll show you why the person you think you are is mostly a costume that was stitched onto you before you could speak, what the frightening middle of this process feels like, and why it's a sign you're doing it right. And finally, what emerges on the other side, a way of being that Jung considered the closest thing to freedom a human being can reach. This isn't a pep talk. It's a map through territory that terrifies most people. And if some part of you has been quietly suspecting that the life you're living doesn't quite belong to you, then you already have the only qualification this journey requires. Let's start with the uncomfortable part. The you reading the world right now, the one with opinions and preferences and a name, is not, according to Jung, your true self. It's what he called the persona. And to understand why becoming yourself is so hard, you first have to understand how completely you've been fused with a mask you never chose. The word persona comes from the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. The face held up so the audience knew which character was speaking. Jung borrowed it deliberately. The persona is the face you hold up so the world knows how to treat you. It's the reliable one, the funny one, the strong one, the easygoing one, the one who never needs anything. And here's what makes it so slippery. You didn't sit down one day and design it. It was built for you, piece by piece, through thousands of tiny lessons about what got you love and what got you left alone. Picture a small child, maybe 4 years old, standing in a kitchen. She's just done something clumsy, knocked over a glass, made a mess, and she watches her mother's face very carefully. Because a child's survival depends entirely on the adults around her, she is wired to read those faces the way a sailor reads weather. If the face tightens, if warmth withdraws, the child learns something in her body long before she has words for it. She learns that this part of me is dangerous. This part costs me love. And slowly, without any conscious decision, she begins to fold that part away. Multiply that single moment by 10,000. Every time you learned which version of yourself made your father proud and which one made him go quiet. Every time you discovered that your anger scared people, so you swallowed it. Every time your sadness was met with impatience, so you learned to smile through it. Every time your natural curiosity was called too much, your sensitivity called weakness, your ambition called selfish. Each of those moments laid down another layer, and the layers fused together until the mask stopped feeling like a mask. It started feeling like your face. Jung didn't think the persona was evil. He thought it was necessary. You genuinely do need a way to move through the social world, a functional self that shows up to work and manages relationships and doesn't say every raw thing that crosses your mind. The problem isn't having a persona. The problem is forgetting you have one. The problem is when the mask fuses so completely that you spend your entire life defending a self that was assembled out of other people's comfort. And this is the first thing Jung would want you to understand about becoming yourself. You can't become who you are until you notice how much of you is performance. Not fake exactly. The persona is real in the way a shadow puppet is real. It moves, it convinces, it does its job. But it's cast by a hand you can't see. And the whole journey of individuation begins the moment you turn around and finally look at the hand. Most people never turn around. Life is too busy, the performance too rewarded, the alternative too frightening. So they live their whole lives inside the mask, and they feel a low, persistent ache they can't name. A sense that something is missing even when everything looks fine on paper. Jung had a phrase for this. He said that a neurosis is, at bottom, the suffering of a soul that has not found its meaning. And a great deal of what we call ordinary adult unhappiness is exactly this: the quiet grief of a person who has become very good at being someone they are not. So how does the turning around happen? How does someone who has worn the mask for decades finally begin to notice it? Jung observed that it almost never happens because things are going well. Wholeness doesn't come knocking when you're comfortable. It comes when the persona cracks. Something breaks the performance. A marriage built on the compliant version of you finally collapses because you couldn't sustain the compliance any longer. A career you constructed on somebody else's definition of success starts to feel like a beautifully decorated cell. A loss arrives that's too big to smile through. Or sometimes nothing external happens at all. You just wake up one gray morning with a feeling in your chest that you can't argue away. A feeling that whispers, "This is not your life. You are living someone else's." That crack is not the beginning of your breakdown. It's the beginning of your becoming. Jung would say the psyche has an intelligence of its own, and when the conscious personality has drifted too far from the truth of who you are, the deeper self starts pushing back. It disrupts. It sends dreams. It withdraws energy from the roles you've outgrown until those roles feel hollow and gray. The depression, the restlessness, the strange grief that comes over you in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. Jung saw these not as malfunctions to be silenced, but as messengers, the self trying to get your attention, the acorn straining against a shape that was never its own. Here's the part that catches people completely off guard, though. When the persona cracks and you finally start looking underneath, the first thing you meet is not some radiant, authentic self full of light and peace. The first thing you meet is everything you've spent your whole life hiding. Jung called this the shadow, and confronting it is where the real work and the real fear begins. The shadow is the disowned self. It's the storehouse of everything you decided, somewhere back in that kitchen when you were 4, was unacceptable. If your persona required you to be endlessly kind, your shadow holds your cruelty and your rage. If your persona was built on being strong and self-sufficient, your shadow carries your neediness, your longing to be held, your terror of being abandoned. If you built your whole identity around being humble and selfless, your shadow contains a whole hidden landscape of ambition, envy, and appetite you've never admitted to owning. None of this is evil. That's the crucial thing Jung kept insisting on. The shadow isn't your dark side in the dramatic, villainous sense. It's simply the part of your full humanity that didn't make the cut, the parts that got you punished or shamed or ignored, so you exiled them into the basement of your own psyche and locked the door. But here's what Jung understood that changes everything. Whatever you lock in the basement doesn't die. It grows stronger in the dark, and it runs your life from down there, unseen. This is one of the most important things he ever said, and I want to give it to you in his own words. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Sit with that for a second. The reason you keep ending up in the same kind of relationship, the reason you sabotage the thing right before it succeeds, the reason a certain type of person enrages you far beyond what they deserve. Jung would say those aren't random. Those are your shadow, speaking through your life because you refuse to speak with it directly. You call it bad luck or bad timing or just how you are. He'd call it the unlived part of you, demanding to be lived. There's a beautiful and uncomfortable clue Jung gave us for finding the shadow, and you can use it today. Pay attention to what irritates you most intensely in other people. Not mild annoyance, the reactions that are way out of proportion. The person whose arrogance makes your blood boil. The one whose neediness makes your skin crawl. The one whose selfishness you can't stop talking about. Jung's insight was that the traits we react to most violently in others are very often the exact traits we've disowned in ourselves. He put it this way: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Imagine a man who prides himself on being generous, endlessly giving, the one who always picks up the check and never asks for anything. And there's a colleague of his, someone openly self-serving, who negotiates hard and puts himself first without apology. And this man cannot stand him. He rants about him. He loses sleep over him. From the outside, it looks like moral disgust. Jung would gently suggest something else is happening. That colleague is living, out loud, the exact self-interest the generous man has spent his life burying. The rage isn't really about the colleague. It's the sound of a locked basement door being rattled from the inside. Meeting your shadow is humbling in a way that's hard to describe until you've done it. You have to sit down across from the parts of yourself you've always judged in others and admit, that's in me too. The pettiness, the jealousy, the capacity for cruelty, the raw hunger for recognition. And this is where a lot of people flinch and run back to the mask, because it's genuinely easier to keep believing you're simply the good, kind, reasonable person your persona has been advertising. Jung said, and I think he was exactly right, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But here's the turn, and it's a turn that surprises almost everyone. Integrating the shadow doesn't make you worse, it makes you whole. The man who finally admits he has self-interest doesn't become a monster. He becomes someone who can finally set a boundary, ask for what he needs, stop drowning in resentment. The woman who reclaims her buried anger doesn't become cruel. She becomes someone who can protect herself, who commands respect, who stops being walked over. The energy you spend keeping the basement door shut is enormous. When you open it and let those exiled parts back into the house, that energy comes home to you. Jung watched it happen again and again. People didn't get darker. They got more real, more grounded, more alive. As he put it, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. But on the far side of that pain is a person who is finally standing on solid ground. If you're feeling something stir as I describe this, a sense of recognition, maybe a little unease, the feeling of a door you've kept shut for a long time, that's worth paying attention to. This kind of inner turning is hard to do alone, and even harder to do without a way to hold the question steady. That's exactly why we put together a companion guide called True Self-Discovery. built around 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's own approach to the psyche. It's not a shortcut because there isn't one. It's more like a lantern for the parts of this descent that are dark and disorienting, a way to keep listening to yourself while the ground shifts. If any of this is landing close to home, you'll find the link waiting just below. Now let's keep going, because the shadow is only the first figure you meet in the dark. Once you've begun the honest work of turning around and looking at yourself, the persona, the shadow, Jung says something even stranger starts to happen. You begin to realize how much of what you thought was the outside world is actually your own psyche projected outward. He called this withdrawing your projections, and it's one of the most quietly revolutionary ideas in all of his work. A projection is what happens when you take something that lives inside you, usually something you can't or won't see directly, and you experience it as if it belongs entirely to someone else out there. We do this constantly, and we have almost no awareness we're doing it. The person you idealize, who seems to carry all the wisdom and light you long for, you've likely projected your own undeveloped potential onto them. The person you demonize, who seems to embody everything wrong with the world, you've likely hung your own shadow on them. In both cases, you're not seeing a person. You're seeing a screen with your own film playing across it. Think about the way infatuation works. You meet someone, and within days, they seem to contain everything you've ever wanted. Depth, mystery, the promise that they'll complete you. Jung would say, gently, that you're not actually seeing that person yet. You barely know them. What you're seeing is a projection of your own inner ideal, an image from the depths of your own psyche, draped over a stranger who happens to fit the outline. And this is why the crash, when it comes, is so brutal. The projection can't hold. The real human being underneath eventually breaks through the image, does something ordinary and disappointing, and you feel almost betrayed, as if they promised to be a god and then failed to deliver. They never promised anything. You did the casting. Why does any of this matter for becoming yourself? Because every projection is a piece of you that's living outside you. Every time you hang your greatness on a hero, you've exiled your own greatness. Every time you hang your darkness on an enemy, you've refused a part of your own truth. And Jung's point is startling in its simplicity. The whole time you think you're relating to the world, you're often just relating to lost fragments of yourself, scattered across other people. Becoming whole means calling those pieces home. It means looking at the person you idolize and asking, what capacity in me am I too afraid to own that I've handed it to them? Looking at the person you can't stand and asking, what part of my own nature am I refusing that I have to see it as entirely theirs? This work turns your relationships into a kind of mirror, not always a flattering one. Slowly, you stop seeing other people as saviors or villains and start seeing them as they actually are, flawed, complex, human, neither carrying your salvation nor responsible for your darkness. And something remarkable happens as a result. Your relationships get lighter and more honest, because you've stopped demanding that other people carry the parts of you that you refuse to hold. You've stopped asking your partner to be your missing wholeness. You've stopped needing your enemy to be the reason for your unhappiness. You take yourself back, piece by piece, out of the people you'd scattered yourself across. There's a deeper layer here that Jung considered essential, and it's one of his most misunderstood ideas. He believed that inside every man there lives an inner feminine figure he called the Anima, and inside every woman an inner masculine figure he called the animus. Set aside whatever cultural baggage those terms carry now, and hear what he was actually pointing at. He was describing the contrasexual part of the psyche, the qualities each of us has been taught to disown because they didn't fit the gender role we were handed. A man raised to be tough, rational, and unemotional has often exiled his capacity for tenderness, for feeling, for receptivity, for relationship. And Jung would say that whole inner realm becomes his anima, which he then meets, projected, in the women he's drawn to and the women he can't understand. A woman raised to be accommodating, soft, and self-effacing has often exiled her capacity for assertion, for clear judgment, for standing her ground, her animus, which she then encounters projected onto the men she both admires and resents. The task of individuation is to stop meeting these forgotten parts only out there, in other people, and to build a real relationship with them inside. The man learns to feel, the woman learns to stand. Each becomes, in Jung's sense, more complete, no longer half a person searching desperately for their other half in another human being, but a whole psyche that contains its own opposites. Now, if you've been following the arc of all this, you might notice something. It sounds like the process is one long dismantling. You take off the persona, you climb down into the shadow, you pull back your projections, you integrate the opposites you'd exiled, and at some point in the middle of all this taking apart, a very real terror sets in, and it's the terror that makes most people quit. Because when you've dismantled the false self and you haven't yet consolidated the true one, you are standing in a gap. And the gap is the loneliest, most disorienting place a human being can occupy. Jung nearly there personally, and I think that's why his work carries a weight that purely academic psychology never quite reaches. Around 1913, at the height of his professional success, Jung went through a period of confrontation with his own unconscious so intense that he genuinely feared he was losing his sanity. He was flooded with visions, with fantasies, with figures that rose up from the depths of his own psyche and would not leave him alone. He didn't run from it, though that would have been the safer choice. He descended into it deliberately, documented it, dialogued with what he found, and spent years down there in the dark. What he brought back up became the foundation of everything he later taught. He knew the gap wasn't theoretical. He'd nearly drowned in it. So when you find yourself there, old identity gone, new one not yet born, no map, no ground, no certainty about who you even are anymore, Jung would not tell you that you've gone wrong. He'd tell you you've arrived. This is the crucible. This is the place where transformation actually happens, precisely because there's nothing left to hold on to, and your only job here is one that runs against every instinct you have. Your only job is to not fill the emptiness prematurely, because the pressure to fill it is enormous. The discomfort of being undefined is so intense that people will grab almost anything to make it stop. They rush into a new relationship to feel like someone again. They adopt a new identity wholesale, a new belief system, a new subculture, a new label, because a borrowed self, any borrowed self, feels better than no self at all. They swap one mask for another and call it transformation. But Jung watched this happen constantly, and he saw it for what it was, the flight from the gap, the refusal of the very emptiness that was about to give birth to something real. He described the way through with an idea he called the transcendent function, and it's subtle, so stay with me. When you can hold two opposites at once, the old self dying and the new one not yet here, the grief of what you're losing, and an inexplicable trust in the process, without collapsing into either side, without rushing to resolve the tension, something new is generated. Not a compromise between the two, a third thing. A genuinely new position that neither the conscious mind nor the unconscious could have produced alone. Jung believed this was the psyche's deepest creative act. But it only works if you can bear the tension long enough. If you can stand in the fire of not knowing without grabbing the first exit. This is the part of becoming yourself that no seminar can sell you, because there's nothing to buy. There's only the capacity to sit in the dark and wait, to tolerate being nobody for a while, to resist the urge to slap a new identity over the raw, exposed place where the old one used to be. It's the hardest thing, and it's the thing that separates the people who genuinely individuate from the people who just keep rearranging the furniture of their persona for the rest of their lives. And I want to be honest with you about what the waiting involves, because Jung was honest about it. There's often real loss in this stretch. Relationships that were built entirely on your old, compliant self start to fall away, because the people in them signed up for the mask, not for you. When you stop performing the role you were assigned in someone's life, the strong one, the easy one, the one who never needs anything, the relationship destabilizes, and sometimes it doesn't survive. This is not because you've done something wrong. It's because some connections were never really connections between two whole people. They were arrangements between a mask and the people who found that mask convenient. That's a painful thing to discover. It's also, in its own way, a liberation, because it tells you exactly which relationships were real all along. Jung also observed that the person going through genuine individuation almost always gets misread by the people around them. To the outside world, it can look like a breakdown, a crisis, a bad phase, someone becoming difficult or selfish or lost. The family wants you to get back to normal. Friends want the old you back. And there's this crushing loneliness in knowing that the most important work of your entire life looks, to nearly everyone you love, like you're falling apart. You can't really explain it either. The words don't land. They hear crisis where you feel calling. That gap in understanding is one of the heaviest parts of the whole journey, and it's why the middle of individuation is so often walked alone. But now let me show you what all of this is for. Because Jung was not describing a permanent descent into darkness. He was describing a death that precedes a birth. And what gets born on the far side of the gap is the thing this whole journey has been reaching toward. A fundamental reorganization of who is running your life. Here's the shift, and it's everything. For most of your life, your ego has been the center. The ego is your conscious sense of I, the part that thinks it's in charge, that makes the plans, that manages the persona and keeps the shadow locked away. And there's nothing wrong with having an ego. You need one. But when the ego believes it's the whole story, when it thinks it's the total sum of who you are, your life stays small and defended and exhausting, because a huge amount of your energy goes into propping up an image and suppressing everything that doesn't fit it. What Jung discovered is that there's a deeper center. He called it the self, with a capital S, and he meant something specific, the total psyche, conscious and unconscious together, the organizing principle that contains and transcends the ego the way the ocean contains a single wave. The self is that inner blueprint, the acorn's knowledge of the oak. It's the part of you that was whole before the world taught you to fragment yourself, and that has been waiting patiently underneath every performance for you to finally listen. Individuation, in the end, is the slow relocation of your center of gravity, from the ego to the self. From the frightened little manager who's been trying to control everything and win everyone's approval, to a deeper ground of being that doesn't need the approval, that isn't threatened by disagreement, that can hold contradiction and complexity without falling apart. Jung described the ego's first real encounter with the self as a kind of defeat, and he meant it. The part of you that thought it was in charge discovers that it isn't, that it's more like a small conscious island in a vast sea it barely understands. That's humbling. It's also the beginning of an entirely different way of being alive. When you're living from the self rather than the ego, the persona becomes something you can wear and take off at will, instead of something fused to your face. You still show up to work as a functional adult, but you know it's a role, and you can set it down when you get home. The shadow stops running your life from the basement because you've let it upstairs and gotten to know it, so it no longer needs to sabotage you to get your attention. Your projections come home, so you see people more clearly and demand less of them. And underneath all of it, there's a stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances, a sense of being rooted in something that can't be taken away by a bad review, a failed relationship, or someone else's disapproval. Jung captured the whole aim of this in one line that has traveled far beyond psychology, and it's worth hearing carefully. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. A privilege. Not an obligation, not a self-improvement project, not another item on the list of things you're failing at. A privilege. Something most people never get to, something rare and precious, the deepest freedom available to a human being. And notice the phrasing, become who you truly are. Not become someone better, not become someone else. Become the one you already are underneath everything that was piled on top. Now I want to be careful here because there's a version of this that gets sold in a shiny, easy package, and Jung would have had no patience for it. The self that emerges from individuation is not a permanently blissful, enlightened, conflict-free being who floats through life radiating serenity. That's a fantasy, and chasing it is just the persona in spiritual clothing. The individuated person still struggles. They still have a shadow. You never fully finish integrating it. You just develop an ongoing relationship with it. They still feel pain, still get things wrong, still have dark days. The difference is that they're no longer at war with themselves. They've stopped splitting into the acceptable half and the exiled half. They can hold their own contradictions without needing to resolve them into a tidy story. And this makes them, honestly, a little inconvenient to the world. Because a person who has stopped performing, who holds their own boundaries, who says the true thing instead of the comfortable thing, who can't be manipulated through their need for approval, that person doesn't fit smoothly into systems that run on everyone quietly playing their assigned roles. They make some rooms go quiet. They can't be recruited into other people's dramas as easily, because they've withdrawn the projections that used to hook them. Jung was clear-eyed about this. The reward for becoming yourself is not universal approval. It's something better and lonelier. The deep, unshakable relief of no longer having to be anyone but yourself. So, let me bring this down out of the abstract and into what it actually asks of you, because Jung was a working psychiatrist, not just a philosopher, and he cared enormously about how this gets lived rather than merely understood. The first thing it asks is that you take your inner life seriously. In a culture obsessed with the external, with output, achievement, appearance, the endless optimization of the surface, Jung insisted that the decisive work happens inward. He famously said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." He didn't mean abandon the world. He meant that the answers you keep hunting for out there, the perfect circumstances, the right person, the achievement that will finally make you feel real, were never going to come from out there, because the thing that's missing isn't a circumstance. It's a relationship with yourself that you've never actually sat down and built. Practically, this meant paying attention to the material the unconscious sends you. Your dreams, which Jung treated not as random neural static, but as genuine communications from the deeper psyche, often carrying exactly the truth your conscious mind has been avoiding. The images that grip you for no obvious reason, the moods that arrive uninvited, the strong reactions that seem out of proportion, those little flares that point straight at your shadow. Becoming yourself means becoming curious about your own inner weather, instead of just being pushed around by it. It means asking, when something in you flares up, not just, how do I make this stop, but what is this trying to tell me? The second thing it asks is that you stop outsourcing the definition of your life. Every one of us absorbed, before we could evaluate them, a whole set of assumptions about what a good life looks like, what success is, what we're supposed to want, who we're supposed to be. Jung would have you drag every one of those assumptions into the light and ask a simple, ruthless question. Is this mine, or did I inherit it? Is this ambition actually my ambition, or my father's unlived dream running through me? Is this the life I want, or the life that got approval? Most people never ask, and so they spend 70 years faithfully executing a plan they never actually chose. The turning point of an individuated life is the moment you realize you're allowed to put down the plan that isn't yours. The third thing, and this is the one that takes the most courage, is that you have to be willing to disappoint people. Not out of cruelty, and not as some performance of rebellion, which is just the persona flipped inside out, but because you genuinely cannot become yourself while your primary goal is managing everyone else's comfort. The compliant child who lives inside so many adults will do almost anything to avoid someone's disapproval. And Jung's work asks you, again and again, to choose your own truth over that approval, in 1,000 small moments, to say the honest thing, to set the boundary, to make the choice that's right for you even when it isn't the choice everyone wanted. Every time you do, you take a little more of yourself back from the world. None of this happens in a weekend. That's the last thing I want you to understand, and it's maybe the most important. Individuation isn't an event, it's a direction. It's the work of the whole second half of life, and often it doesn't even begin in earnest until something has cracked the persona open, which is why so much of it arrives in midlife, when the achievements that were supposed to make you happy have been achieved, and the emptiness is somehow still there, waiting to be understood. Jung didn't see that emptiness as failure. He saw it as an invitation, the first honest question of the rest of your life. Not, how do I get more of what I've been chasing, but who am I underneath everything I've been chasing it for? If you've stayed with me this far, then I suspect this isn't just interesting to you. I suspect some part of it is already happening. Maybe the persona has already cracked. Maybe you're standing in the gap right now, in that disorienting space where the old self is gone and the new one hasn't arrived, wondering whether you're breaking down or breaking open. If that's where you are, I want you to hear the thing Jung spent his life trying to tell people. You are not lost. You are being found, and the ground will hold you, even when it feels like there's no ground at all. For the stretches of this that feel too dark to navigate on your own, the reflection exercises in true self-discovery were built for exactly this terrain. 24 practices rooted in Jung's understanding of the psyche, meant to walk beside you while you find your own footing, rather than hand you someone else's answers. The link is right below, and if you feel the pull, that pull is worth trusting.